Hi everyone. I'm going to continue reading our Fablehaven book. This is chapter 17, A Desperate Gamble. Dreading nightfall did nothing to prevent it. The sunset diminished and disappeared until Kendra had only the light reflected from half a moon to guide her. The night grew cooler, but not cold. The forest was swathed in gloomy shadow. Occasionally she heard unsettling sounds, but she never caught sight of what made them. Although she glanced back frequently, the road behind remained as empty as the road ahead. Kendra alternated between jogging and walking. Without landmarks, it was difficult to discern how much ground she had covered. The dirt road seemed to stretch on forever. She worried about Grandma Sorensen. Since she had shot Muriel and used Hugo to cripple the imps, there would probably be no protection for Grandma from similar torture. Kendra began to wish she had accepted Muriel's invitation to stay at the church with her family. The guilt of being the only escapee was almost too much to bear. It was hard to calculate the passage of time. The night wore on, as endless as the road. The moon gradually migrated across the sky. Or was it the road changing direction? Kendra felt certain she had been on the road for hours when she reached an open area. The moonlight showed a scant trail branching away from the road. It ran towards a tall, shadowy hedge. The pond with the gazebos! Finally a landmark. She could not be more than half an hour from the house, and there was still no hint of dawn. How long before Behemoth would be set free? Maybe the demon was already loose. Would she know when it happened, or would she not find out until she was mobbed by monsters? Kendra rubbed her eyes. She felt weary. Her legs did not want to walk any further. She noticed that she was very hungry. She stopped and stretched for a minute, then she started jogging. She could run the rest of the way, right? It wasn't too far. As she passed the meager trail branching from the road, Kendra skidded to a halt. A new thought had occurred to her, inspired by the irregular hedge looming off to the side of the road. The Fairy Queen had a shrine on the island in the middle of the pond. Wasn't she supposed to be the most powerful person in all of the fairy world? Maybe Kendra could try asking her for help. Kendra folded her arms. She knew so little about the Fairy Queen. Apart from hearing that the Queen was powerful, she had heard only that to set foot on her island meant certain death. Some guy had tried it and turned into dandelion seeds. But why was he trying it? Kendra did not think she had been given a specific reason, just that he had a desperate need. But the fact that he had tried meant he thought he might succeed. Maybe he just didn't have a good enough reason. Kendra considered her need. Her grandparents and her brother were about to be killed, and Fablehaven was about to be destroyed. That would be bad for the fairies, too, wouldn't it? Or would the fairies not care? Maybe they would just go elsewhere. Indecisive, Kendra stared at the faint trail. What weapon did she expect to find at the house? Probably nothing. So she would most likely end up crashing through the gate or climbing it to get away before Behemoth and Muriel caught up and finished her off, and her family would perish. But this Fairy Queen idea might work. If the Queen was so powerful, she would be able to stop Muriel and maybe even Behemoth. Kendra needed an ally. Despite her noble intentions, she could not see any way she could succeed on her own. Kendra had felt a new sensation inside, ever since the idea had popped into her head. The feeling was so unexpected that it took a moment to recognize it as hope. There was no combination locks in the way. She just had to throw herself at the mercy of an all-powerful being and plead for her family. What was the worst that could happen? Death, but on her terms. No bloodthirsty imps, no witches, no demons. Just a big poof of dandelion fluff. What was the best possibility? The Fairy Queen could turn Muriel into dandelion seeds and rescue Kendra's family. Kendra started down the trail. She felt butterflies in her stomach. It was an encouraging kind of nervousness, much preferable to the dread of certain failure. She started running. No crawling under the hedge this time. The path led to an archway. Kendra ran under the archway and into the manicured lawn beyond. By moonlight, the whitewashed pavilions and boardwalks were even more picturesque than during the day. Kendra really could envision a fairy queen living on the island at the center of the tranquil pond. Of course, the queen didn't actually live there. It was just a shrine. Kendra would have to go petition her and hope the queen would respond. Getting to the island would be the first challenge. The pond was full of naiads who liked to drown people, which meant she needed a sturdy boat. Kendra hurried across the lawn towards the nearest gazebo. She tried to ignore the shifting shadows she saw ahead, various creatures ducking out of sight. Anticipating what she was about to attempt, Kendra felt like her intestines were caught in an egg beater. She forced away all fear. Would Grandpa turn and flee? Would Grandma? Would Seth? Or would they try their best to save her? She charged up the steps of the nearest pavilion and started running along the boardwalk. Her shoes pounded noisily against the boards, defying the silence. She saw her destination, the boathouse, 3 gazebos away. The surface of the lake was a black mirror reflecting the moonlight. A few twinkling fairies hovered just above the water. Otherwise, there was no sign of life. Kendra reached the pavilion attached to a small pier. She dashed down the steps and onto the quay. She reached the boathouse and tried the door. Just like before, it was locked. The door was not big, but it looked sturdy. Kendra kicked it hard. The impact jolted up the length of her leg, making her wince. She rammed the door with her shoulder, again hurting herself instead of the door. Kendra stepped back. The boathouse was basically a large shed floating on the water. It had no windows. She hoped it still had boats inside. If it did, they would be sitting in the water, protected by walls and a roof, but no floor. If she jumped into the lake, she could surface inside the boathouse and climb into a boat. She studied the water. The black reflective surface was impenetrable. There could be 100 naiads waiting in ambush, or none. It was impossible to tell. The whole plan would be pointless if she drowned before reaching the island. Based on what she had heard from Lena, there would be naiads eagerly waiting for her to get near the water. Jumping in would be suicide. She sat down and started bucking the door with both feet, the same method Seth had used to break into the barn. She made a lot of noise, but did not seem to be harming the door at all. Kicking harder only made her legs hurt more. She needed a tool, or a key, or some dynamite. Kendra ran up to the pavilion, searching for something she could use to pry the door open. She saw nothing. If only there was a sledgehammer lying around. She tried to calm herself. She had to think. Maybe if she just kept pounding, the door would eventually give. Sort of like erosion. But it hadn't budged yet, and she didn't have all night. There had to be a smarter solution. What did she have to work with? Nothing. Nothing but a few shadowy creatures who ducked out of sight at her approach. "Okay, listen up," she shouted. "I know you can hear me. I have to get inside the boathouse. A witch is setting Behemoth free, and all of Fablehaven is going to be destroyed. I'm not asking for anybody to stick their necks out. I just need somebody to beat down the boathouse door. My grandfather is the caretaker here, and I give you full permission. I am going to turn my back and close my eyes. When I hear the door break, I'll wait 10 seconds before turning back around." Kendra turned around and closed her eyes. She heard nothing. "Any time, just smash down the door. I promise I won't look." She heard a gentle splash and a tinkling sound. "Okay, sounds like we have a taker. Just break down the door." She heard nothing. She suddenly realized that something could have emerged from the water and be sneaking up behind her. Unable to resist, she turned and peeked. No dripping creatures were in sight. All was quiet. There were ripples on the previously glassy pond, and lying on the dock near the boathouse was a key. Kendra rushed down the stairs and picked up the key. It was wet, corroded, and a little slimy. Longer than a regular key, it looked old-fashioned. Wiping it against her shirt, she carried the key to the boathouse and inserted it in the keyhole. It fit perfectly. She turned it, and the door swung inward. Kendra shivered. The implications were disturbing. Apparently, a naiad had tossed her the key. They wanted her out on the water. With only the moonlight seeping through the door to provide illumination, the boathouse was very dim. Squinting, Kendra could see 3 boats tied to the narrow pier. 2 large rowboats, one slightly broader than the other, and a smaller paddle boat. The paddle boat was the kind with bicycle pedals. Kendra had once ridden in one at a park with a lake. On one wall hung several oars of varying length. Near the door were a crank and a lever. Kendra tried to turn the crank, but it would not move. She pulled the lever. Nothing happened. She tried the crank again, and this time it turned. A sliding door on the opposite side of the boathouse staring out the open door of the pond. A sliding door on the opposite side of the boathouse from the dock began to open, letting in more light. Kendra kept cranking, relieved that she would be able to paddle a boat directly out of the boathouse onto the pond. Standing in the gloom of the boathouse, staring out the open door of the pond, Kendra began to doubt. She felt nauseated with fear. Was she really prepared to go to her death? To have naiads drown her, or to fall victim to a spell protecting a forbidden island? Grandpa and Grandma Sorensen were resourceful. They might have already escaped. Was she doing this for nothing? Kendra remembered an occasion 3 years ago at a community pool. She had desperately wanted to jump off the high dive. Her mom had warned her that it was higher than it looked, but nothing could dissuade her. Many kids were jumping off it, several her age or younger. She stood in line at the base of the ladder. When her turn came, she started climbing, amazed at how much higher she seemed with each step. When she arrived at the top, she felt like she was standing on a skyscraper. She wanted to turn back, but all the kids in line would know she was scared. Plus, her parents were watching. She walked forward along the diving board. There was a slight breeze. She wondered if the people on the ground could feel it. When she approached the end of the board, she stared down at the rippling water. She could see all the way to the bottom of the pool. Jumping no longer seemed like a fun thing to do. Realizing that the longer she hesitated, the more attention she would draw, she turned around quickly and descended the ladder, trying to avoid eye contact with the people waiting in line at the bottom. She had not been up a high dive since. In fact, she rarely took any sort of risk. Once again, she was standing on the brink of something frightening. But this was different. Jumping off a high dive, or riding a roller coaster with multiple loops, or passing a note to Scott Thomas. Those were all voluntary thrills. There was no real consequence to avoiding the risk. In her current situation, her family would probably die if she failed to act. She had to stand by her previous decision and carry out her plan, regardless of the consequences. Kendra considered the oars. She had never rowed a boat and could easily picture herself floundering, especially if nasty naiads were giving her a hard time. She examined the paddle boat. Designed for a single passenger, it was wider than it needed to be, presumably for additional stability. The childish craft was not nearly as big as the rowboats, and she would be close to the water. But at least Kendra thought she could maneuver it. Kendra sighed. Kneeling, she untied the little boat, tossing the slender rope onto the seat. The paddle boat wobbled when she stepped aboard, and she had to crouch and use her hands to avoid falling into the water. The bottom of the novelty craft was completely closed, which meant nothing could grab at her feet. After getting situated, Kendra sat facing the dock. There was a steering wheel to control lateral movement. Turning the wheel all the way to one side, she pedaled backwards and slid away from the dock. Cranking the wheel the other way, she started pedaling forward, and the boat quietly slid out of the boathouse. Ripples radiated out from the front of the paddle boat as she steered it towards the island, pedaling briskly. The island was not far, maybe 80 yards. The paddle boat moved steadily closer to her destination, until it started moving away from the island. She pedaled harder, but the boat kept sliding diagonally backward. Something was towing her. The boat began to spin. Turning the wheel and paddling did nothing. Then the boat suddenly tilted precariously to one side. Something was trying to tip her. Kendra leaned to prevent the boat from capsizing, and the boat abruptly rocked the other way. Kendra changed position, counterbalancing desperately. She saw wet fingers holding the side of the boat and slapped at them. The action was rewarded by giggling. The boat began to rotate quickly. "Leave me alone!" Kendra demanded. "I have to get to the island." This earned a longer titter from multiple voices. Kendra paddled furiously, but it did no good. She kept spinning and getting hauled in the wrong direction. The naiads started rocking the boat again. Thanks to the low center of gravity, Kendra found that leaning was enough to prevent the boat from capsizing, but the naiads were relentless. They tried to distract her by banging the bottom of the vessel and by waving at her. The boat pitched and rocked and spun, and then suddenly the naiads would heave in earnest, trying to catch her off balance. Time after time, Kendra reacted quickly, shifting her weight to spoil their attempts to flip her. It was a stalemate. The naiads did not show themselves. She heard their laughter and glimpsed their hands, but never saw a face. Kendra decided to quit paddling. It was getting her nowhere and wasting energy. She resolved to exert herself only to keep the boat from tipping. The attempts grew less frequent. She said nothing, made no response to the taunting giggles, ignored the hands on the side of the boat. She simply leaned as needed when they tried to tip the boat. She was getting better at it. They were not able to tilt it as much. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. I will finish this chapter hopefully tomorrow. Hope you enjoyed it.